Hello and welcome to another episode of Project 2JZ28. Well, last we knew, we dropped the Camaro off with Blake and he was going to tear into the car and start working on the wiring harness. So we'll see where he's at today. Yeah! Wires, and more wires.
Lots of wires.
Ooh, lack of wires, lack of ECU. That's a good thing. That's progress.
Well, if it was a Honda, that would be the goal, right? They like to cut the wiring harnesses.
So what do we got going on, buddy?
So down here on the floor is your old harness that we pulled out.
Okay.
It is partially stripped, partially still sleeved. Because that was, at least initially, a working harness, all of the wiring in it is known good design, basically. So I'm gonna keep all of the sensors and fuel injectors and coils and all those kinds of things in the same spot. But we're gonna go through, this is a harness built out of what's called TXL wire, which is essentially what you get in an OEM car, OEM modern car at least, is TXL. What we're building now is a TEFZEL wiring harness, which is what you'll hear called mil spec or race spec or expensive spec.
So the difference between a Honda or a Kia versus perhaps a military jet.
Yeah, so you've got really high grade conductors inside. We're going to use a little bit smaller conductors for a lot of this.
Okay.
Most of this is 18 gauge. Most of this new one will be 22 gauge. For sensors and things, it doesn't matter. For things that need voltage, we have 18 gauge, but your big difference, if you look at the old harness versus the new, this is an 18 gauge wire in the old harness, this is an 18 gauge in the new, and I don't know how easily you can see on camera, but it's almost half the size, and that's because the jacket on the mil-spec wire is much thinner, because it's made of Teflon. So it's also a lot more heat resistant.
That's good.
So it's smoother, it's abrasion resistant, it's heat resistant. These are all the reasons they use that in military applications. Then in the center for our cam and crank sensors, we're using a shielded wire, which is this. So this is two of those 22 gauges with a metal shield around it, and then it's pre-twisted. So we actually did use those. This is what's in your old harness for crank and cam. So we did have a similar setup. But not nearly as nice. These, when they come out to the ECU side, will get a soldered on ground braid that'll go to the signal ground, and that will help make sure that there's no noise pickup. So this is the start of the new harness. This is what I would call the core. So this is the first two inner leads, and then there's a couple of power leads and things that are in there just to get this to round. And then if you look, these are all rotated around. It's a wire wrap. So this is a lay in one direction. And then if you note, there's like a string over it.
Right.
That is a Kevlar string that helps hold it all together. And then we have very fancy tape that is high temperature here. And that's what we use when we're essentially joining things together. So when we look through this, this is the start. These ends are actually finished here. So this is some of the things, there'll be heat shrink with glue that supports these. The heat shrink on the rest of this is basically Raychem DR25. This is V25, so it's I think the Pro Wire equivalent.
So for those of us that are not on Blake's level, which is the vast majority of us, basically what we're getting here is a much more upgraded version of the previous wiring harness. And a lot of this can help prevent any damage in the future, and to possibly rule out. I don't know, like if you found anything in the old wiring harness that was a smoking gun or anything you saw that was sticking out that may have failed. Not yet, you said. But when you do it to this level, that really kind of, I guess it prevents any possible like nicks or like melty bits or anything else, I'm assuming?
It makes it a lot harder for those to happen. So this has a few benefits. When you build a harness like this, it's not very flexible. This, as you notice, is very, very flexible, and
Okay.
as we add layers to it, those layers will roll in the opposite direction, and that allows it when you bend it, they slide over each other.
Oh, okay,
If
that's
the
good.
wires are straight and you bend it, if you think of these, so if these wires are taut and straight, when I
Right.
bend it, the wires on the outside have to bend more than the wires on the inside.
That makes sense.
When you have a rotational lay, they all bend the same amount.
I gotcha.
So it's a little bit better from a vibration standpoint. It's a lot better from a flexibility standpoint. This heat shrink is immune to damage from diesel, gasoline, ethanol, oil, coolant, brake fluid,
Awesome.
all those kinds of things. So is the wire itself.
Okay.
And then each end actually gets glue shrunk tight, so it seals it from end to end. This is kind of a mid-grade or lower grade race spec harness in that we're not going to take, we're going to use OEM connectors on the end of a lot of these. So if you want to go real fancy, what you do is you cut the OEM connector off and then you pot that in epoxy and you put Deutsch connectors or race spec connectors on
I feel
all of
like
these.
that would be beyond excessive, given the application of
Yeah,
my car.
like my
to the-
Mustang's done like that. There's not really a need for it, and it is literally, you're taking a harness that's already $800, $900 in materials, and you're probably making it $2,000 or $3,000 in materials by the time you do all that, for not really a lot of benefit.
Yeah, for the extra
So-
cost, I feel like, and really, this car isn't like, it is a street car first and foremost. Would I like to take it to the track, and obviously I'm going to drive it aggressively, sure, but I don't necessarily think it needs to be ran to the ringer to that extent. I'm glad that we're going the extra mile with the harness, because that seems to be the most likely suspect of why it's running like garbage. But I don't necessarily think that putting all the sensors and stuff through the epoxy lane would really do anything above what because I've not really had any issues with that. On top of the harness, we talked about also, you said you wanted to put the ECU in a different location too with it?
Yeah. So in the passenger footwell, it's kind of hard to see. It's dark because there's no lighting in there.
I'll try to get the best I can if I can.
But there was I think it's an ABS module, looking at the part number, that controls, or airbag module, I should say.
Okay.
So what I did was down here in the footwell, right
Hard to
here,
see, but-
there was a module. I took that module and flipped it so it's up here now.
Okay.
And we're gonna put the ECU right down here.
Okay.
And it's, you can see it's sitting down here. I know
don't.
it's kind of dark,
I'll
but
try and get a cell phone light so everybody watching this can actually see what we're talking about, because otherwise it's everybody's just seeing
pitch
black.
black. Yeah. So essentially, right here is where that's going to go.
Okay.
And the connectors will face the firewall.
Okay, cool.
And then that'll allow the harness to come in through the firewall and keep it here. And then there's the cover that goes over this is swooped around to clear what was there before.
Okay.
Like I said, I basically flipped that around and put that up.
Okay.
Where there was also a gap, so that'll allow it to sit down in there and just basically be out of the elements. Where it was is where the stock ECU was. Not really a concern from a temperature standpoint.
Yeah, I know we had the ECU getting hot, and for the first little bit, I think we were thinking just the obvious, well, the turbo's here, the ECU's here, it's getting hot, let's shield it. Maybe that's the reason, even though it was odd because we've never had heat issues before, and these things are meant to be put in the engine bay. And before that even, when the car was trying to get initially tuned at Indiana Muscle Car, we had the issue with it getting wet. So then I was concerned, well, washing it, and we made that plate over it. So I guess it just eliminates any possibility of that happening when it's inside.
The water is the bigger concern. It's easy enough to move it. We're redoing the harness anyway. We make it all, 18 inches longer, and it fits under the dash. And then if it gets wet, you're driving a boat at that point, right? Like you have much bigger problems than the ECU being wet.
Correct.
So that'll let that move, or that'll keep that dry. And then the other thing we're going to do, there's a few little tweaks on the harness where maybe runs were a little shorter than they needed to be, or runs were a little longer than they needed to be on the original harness, or just stuff wasn't easy to maintenance later. So since we're redoing that, now we've had it together and apart several times. We know what is and isn't easy to get to. So I'll adjust some of the routing just to make the harness easier to service in the future.
That sounds great.
So
any little upgrades we can do in the meantime would be fantastic. And I know I talked about, some of the wiring and the boost gauge wasn't functioning. Maybe that was suspect. I don't think it has anything to do with why it was running like garbage, but little things we could do tweaking along the way would be awesome.
Yeah, the boost gauge, I think something's just loose in the A-pillar.
Okay.
But that all connects down where the ECU is under the floorboard. It'll also make it easier if you're ever wanting to do live tuning on the car. You don't have to rig a USB cable from your engine bay to a laptop on the passenger seat.
That's nice.
So it'll all be in the footwell.
That's cool.
So you could pull that piece of trim off, plug a USB in,
Perfect.
and you're fine. Or we could keep a permanently done one and put a. There's options, but either way, it's not coming out, and you can have that connector off without.
Yeah, depending on how
water.
easy the trim is to get it out, it'd be nice just to have some. Even if we tapped or just drilled a small hole where I can just plug in, plug out real quick, would be super convenient.
Yep.
Well, awesome. Well, I'm glad to see that good progress is being made. And for those of you at home, like this isn't something you can just pick up and I think I've got 10 minutes I'll dedicate. This takes a great deal of time, and this is why we were really hoping to avoid this at all costs. But I think when it comes down to it, we really went through about every single possibility we could, even trying different ECUs and things over and over and over again. And it really has come to building the harness as we feel like is the next best step of why the Camaro is still running kind of like garbage.
Yeah, this is the next easiest step, easy being a relative term. This kind of harness, if you were having one of these built from scratch from a shop, you're probably looking at around $5,000 to $10,000 because it is a substantial amount of labor and a substantial amount of cost, right? Now, mind you, a harness, this one looks a little bit rough because I've ripped it apart to do some things. This is still probably a $2,000, $3,000 harness.
Yeah, you spent a lot of time on other harness, and why it breaks my heart to ask you to build another one. But, all the work in the car was great, much greater than that, and it would be great to have it just running how it should for once and not driving like a, I don't know. I don't even know what I want to say. It's just not running right. So we got to do what we got to do to get it running right. So I really, really, really appreciate the effort, and this is not like a small task at all. It's horribly big. So but I think that's probably the next logical route. So
yeah, agreed. Like I said, we'll go through. Like I said, I'm building basically when you build these, you can build it from the ECU out, or you can build it from the furthest sensor away in. I like building from the sensor in, and then you end up with what'll be a block here. This is where the ECU goes. So this right now we have I think this is a coolant temperature sensor, and then this is the alternator. This is the crank position sensor. This is VVT, and somewhere around here we have another sensor.
So talking of sensors, since there's no smoking gun yet, do you think anything like a crank position sensor or anything like that could cause the ECU to go wonky, or just from the readings it doesn't seem that way because the ECU is just getting hot?
It's not going to cause a temperature problem.
Okay, and that seems to be what's been going on with it.
The engine running weird, that may or may not be related to the temperature problem, because it ran fine and had temperature problems too.
That's true.
So that, I don't know if that's related, but we're going to have a clean build. Like I said, we had noise suppression on the crank and cam sensors before. Nothing super obvious there's a problem, but we'll have better now.
Okay.
Everything here is going to be a little bit better from a noise suppression, wiring quality perspective. So we'll eliminate some variables.
Going through things logically, I know this is the next step. It's just, I don't know. I'm just trying to think, like, it worked fine before, so I don't know what it was about, building engine. I'm sure the engine is fine. I'm sure it's built fine. I trust Safe and believe his abilities. I think the engine's great, but definitely there's something going on with running, and I don't know what it was that changed after that. And Tate noticed it when we picked it up, he said, too, that, at the tail end of tuning it was running funky, but then it was good. Then it was bad when I got it, and it has been like kind of just inconsistent junk, and I haven't really railed on it very much because it's not been consistent. I don't want to hurt anything.
Yeah, like I said, we'll eliminate this as a possibility. We'll make sure that we're getting clean data in. I didn't see anything obvious other than the ECU temperature problems when we looked before. Once this is done, the other thing we'll take a look at probably is check the coils again, just because those have been fussy. Yeah. The IGN 1As, for whatever reason, are sensitive. Okay. That's the other thing we'll check. Okay. That's an easy thing to test. We can borrow some of those and swap them if need be. But we'll start with this. We'll get this clean. We'll make sure that the ECU is not doing weird temperature things. Whatever's causing that is some kind of voltage feedback.
Yeah.
We know that,
Okay.
right? So eliminating that is step one, right? Start with what you know is broken. Fix the stuff you know is broken, and then
Yes.
then go from there. So we're going to take care of that first. And this should by all means take care of that.
Perfect. Well, one of the good things, at least, and this is perhaps my own glass half full type mentality, is it's basically winter outside, and I wouldn't be driving this car if it was running like a champ anyway. So it's kind of a nice feeling in the winter doing stuff like this, getting projects, like the car is done in the winter. So maybe in nice driving weather, I don't have to worry about this, and it's running good, and I can get some enjoyment out of the thing. So, again, buddy, really, really appreciate your work on this. Thank you for letting me come over and getting an update with everything, and letting everybody who watches the channel, subscribes, know what the latest is with the Project 2JZ28 and getting her back to good running level. I feel like patience is a word I've thrown around a bit, but it just requires that. I mean, I'm not a shop. I don't have a sponsor. All this is coming out of my own pocket, and making sure Blake is well compensated too for all your hard work and helping me out with this too. But this is, I mean, it hasn't ran right in a couple of years, and this is what it really costs. And on the patience scale of taking care of a car on this scale, when you get stuff running, when you don't have the big shop name money, etc., it's just a lot of time. I really, really do believe, and why I won't sell it, and why I believe it will be worth it when we get it running. I think all the hard work, especially that Blake has done more than anybody, and the car will just make all the patience worth it when it's running right. Because even what little I've driven the car with the 2J in it, I won't lie, it's pretty freaking awesome. It's amazing. This car just means so much to me. I've had it just for so long, from the beginning of the channel. You know where we started, and saying the history when you and I were sitting upstairs in your room talking about the beginning of the channel. It's okay. Like I've got a Corvette now. I can have patience with cars to wait on until it's good. But anyway, I really appreciate the update, buddy, and thank you so much for all the hard work and good progress on everything.
Yeah, no problem. Hopefully next time you see this, it should be at least fully sleeved. And then basically when you build these, if you notice there's a lot of white wire, most of the wire in this will be white. The wire color doesn't matter. We're going to go through and tone them all out and check them all anyway. So the next step, once it's all sleeved and everything but the final glue seal, is we'll go through, test every wire, get them all terminated on both sides, and then you retest it about 5 times. Make sure that everything is exactly where it needs to be. Then you glue it all up. So hopefully we'll have another update when that's there. We got probably about 60, 70 more wires to roll into this. So
yeah, it's hard to gauge. It's easy when it's like building a house. You see the concrete, and then you see the sticks. You're like, man, it's moving so quick. And when we were building this too, boom, got the motor and testing stuff, and when we're piecing together exhaust parts, and every time I come over, I see more of it on. It's easy to see progress. It's a lot harder when you're just looking at small wires. I'm like, really? That's it? But even if you can't see it, there's a lot of progress in between this step and what Blake was talking about to the next. It's just a lot of the little things add up to get this thing running. So
yeah, wiring is the most boring thing to show on YouTube.
Yes, it really
takes
is.
Dozens of hours, and all that happens is this gets slightly thicker. So it's not very interesting, but your end result is really nice.
All necessary to have the brains by everything working. So anyway, well, thanks for tuning in. We'll catch you next time, and thanks again, Blake, for the progress update. And we'll see you next time.